Hi and welcome to Outlaw Bookseller with me, Stephen E. Andrews. And this is a bit of a filler, I admit, but it is something which a lot of you haven't watched. Because we've just had the second anniversary of the channel, I haven't been well, and when you see this, I'm probably still away in Paris. I needed to fill the schedule, but it is something that I think 541 people have watched. It's been on the channel, gosh, I put this up, this is in the early days, and it's my favourite video. It's not technically quite the best I made, but it was the one where I think things stepped up a bit, and it's a video in which I talk about 14 different writers as I walk around the harbour side in Bristol. So there's things in there, but all sorts of writers, science fiction writers, horror writers, gothic, what have you. And I just wanted to represent it because I know, even though I'm always saying please watch the backlist, I know the backlist is huge, I know, and daunting, but I wanted to represent this because it is one of my favourite videos. It's also an indication of the sort of broadness of my vision, and even though there's a massive focus here in SF, and that will continue, this channel is an interdisciplinary channel. It is about the sort of things, whatever appeals to me at a given time, and because I've been in a big science fiction collecting phase, that's been the thing. So don't worry, it's not going to go away from SF, but lots of other things are going to come in, especially now the channel's more established. So do give this a look. If you've seen it before, then please watch again, because I'm really proud of it. I really like it. And I hope to do more things like this as I go off my travels. That's partially constrained by money and the fact I've had polymyalgia, as you know, so we'll see. But anyway, take a look at this. Enjoy 14 writers on a Bristol harbourside walk with a literary flaneur. Okay, here in Bristol today, you probably can't hear me because of the traffic. This pub, which is near Bristol Templemead Station, until recently was called the Reckless Engineer, and it was a pun. It was reckless with W-R-E-C-K-L-E-S-S, as in an engineer without Rex, as opposed to being reckless and feckless and taking risks. Now it's called the Sidings, Eat, Drink, Train, Repeat, which just gives you a rather dystopian vision of the endless cycle of commuterism. And I commuted over here from Bath for 3 years myself in the late 90s when I was assistant manager in a bookshop on College Green, which is now long gone. These two hotels here, you see there's this wedge-shaped building which is covered up at the moment, and the one beyond with the crane projecting above. And this is the part of Bristol where scenes in Radio On were filmed. Black and white, sort of Eurocentric looking film with lots of Bowie and Kraftwerk that goes on rather too long. I think it's Chris Pettit, is it, I think? I watched it again the other day for the first time in many years, didn't get through it. And there used to be, of course, a flyover there where that orange brick building is. Today it's possibly even more of a dystopian nightmare, but not as romantic. Right next to the brutalist facade of the laughingly called Holiday Inn, and there's this vacant lot with a deserted gas station. And I remember with this when it was open. It's been closed probably about 10 years, maybe a bit less. And I used to walk along this route every day between Templemead and College Green when I worked over here, as I say. So this is a very familiar route to me. At that time, I used to listen a lot on my headphones walking to and fro here to CDs on a CD Walkman. Do you remember those? You probably still get them. It's like all these things. People talk about this technology as if it's completely gone, but it's often still out there. So I must check and see if they're still around. Of course, it was quite bulky. You had to carry CDs around. And the two albums I remember playing an awful lot walking back and forth here twice a day were one Outside by David Bowie, which I think is a very underrated Bowie album from the mid-90s, and one of my personal favourites. I put it up there with things like Diamond Dogs. And another one I listened to a lot then, this is 97 to 99 pretty much, I was playing Everything Must Go by the Manic Street Preachers a lot, who before that I hadn't been a massive fan of, and that for me was kind of their breakthrough. Obviously it was for other people. It was a commercially successful record, and Richie'd gone. Some of his lyrics were on it, and you know, I always thought he was a bit of a sixth former in his lyrics, you know, but obviously a good guy. You know, great shame about the disappearance. So what's the point of today? Well, I just thought I'd do a harbourside walk and just have a ramble around really, and then ramble on at the same time. And this building here, the Doubletree by Hilton, this is usually where the Bristol Science Fiction Convention happens, usually September, October. Went a few years ago and attended a panel there, sort of fronted by Storm Constantine, and that was obviously she's dead now. She was very young, you know, very attractive gothy lady. I was never somebody I read very much, and just beyond this you can see the very wonderful church St Mary Redcliffe, which is fantastic. Great thing about Bristol, of course, is it has all sorts of architecture. There's obviously lots of Georgian, but it's a very historic city, fifth biggest city in Britain, and I always really love it. It's great. I love working over here. I just didn't like commuting over here, that's all. So here we are down by Bristol Harbourside. I always really love these candy coloured houses up here. Rather rough underfoot, so do apologise for the camera shake. And I really love coming over here. I come over a lot at the weekends with my partner and with a friend of mine. We sort of go record and book shopping together, but I do occasionally come across in the week on my own if I have a day off, because quite frankly, you know, the weekend is crowded, and I know I talked about this before and I'm a terrible misanthrope, but it's the way I am, I'm afraid. You know, it's great for people to get out and what have you, but you know, there are just so many people in Britain. It's so crowded, and you constantly find yourself dodging runners who are breathing all over you despite the pandemic. You know, you sort of got to watch out for cyclists. Luckily we haven't, you know, seen any e-scooter types down here. I mean, I've got nothing against these activities, as I've said before. It's just, you know, some people consider it and some are not. You know, luckily a lot of people are. So we're going to take a harbourside walk today. Give you a 180. And yeah, I used to go across that bridge every morning, and then beyond that is a square, and across that, and I was virtually where I worked then. It used to take me a minimum of 14 minutes and a maximum of 18, and I wasn't going to miss my train for anybody. What you'll see centre frame there, some cormorants, and it's good news. Cormorants seem to be on the rise. I mean, I was over here the other day and I filmed some then. I'm doing a video soon about Stephen Gregory, who debuted with a wonderful novella called The Cormorant, which is a fantastic sort of new gothic literary horror novel, which has been reissued in the UK by Parthian, which is really good news. Bristol Harbourside is very historic, of course, you know, and of course these days mostly you hear about the unfortunate association with the slave trade, and of course Bristol sort of made history recently with the whole toppling of the statue of Edward Colston and it being thrown into the into the harbourside, not here, in another part of it. Here we go, and here are three of the little guys, one of them with his wings spread out, drying them off after a plunge. And there are two species of cormorant in the UK. There's the cormorant and the shag. I think looking at their heads, I would say these are cormorants. I used to be really good on this sort of stuff when I was a kid, and I've long stopped leafing through my natural history books in terms of field guides. I used to pore over them. But it's really great to see three of them together. What fantastic little guys they are. And of course there's a lot of association with Isambard Kingdom Brunel, the Victorian engineer who built so much of the infrastructure, bridges, railways, all sorts of stuff around the West Country for the Great Western Railway. And I got a GWR train here today, funnily enough. And, you know, it's amazing how much stuff he did. So I'm not going to dwell too much upon that because it's quite a well-known thing. I want to talk about more obscure things. Just going to show you now the Thekla, which is a boat across the river, which has been like a rock and roll venue for many, many years. This is sort of the quietest part of the harbour side, and just coming around here, Lower Guinea Street, and this used to be the Phoenix Wharf, at one point the Alfred Wharf, and there's a pub around here called the Ostrich, which is very popular, and you know, they have all this stuff where you sit outside. I've sat outside here many times myself actually, and it's not a great pub on the inside, I don't think, but it is quite nice to sit out here when it's sunny and have a pint, especially weekdays when there's nobody around. Just going to traverse this bridge in a moment. I do like these little mews houses. They're not really mews houses, but they're that sort of style, and you know, they probably cost a pretty penny, but it'd be lovely to live here. Of course, you have to get used to the fact that, as I say, it's very often crowded down here, but you know, really, really lovely. And this is Monday morning, so it's dead, which is great. Okay, so over Lower Guinea Street footbridge now, and you can see some of the diversity of the architecture behind me. And speaking about Brunel, a sort of tangential association really is LTC Rolt. Now LTC Rolt was an author who specialised in books about engineering, the railways, what have you. Lots of biographies of people like Brunel, books about railway disasters, and he was probably the preeminent figure in that for many, many years in British publishing. And he also wrote ghost stories. He wrote a really good little collection called Sleep No More, which I read about a year ago, and it's fantastic. I read a couple of bits in it before. There's one really great one set in Wales called Cwm Garan, which has a little bit of the spirit of Mackin in it, and that's in Damnable Tales, the folk horror anthology, which made a splash last year. But it's a really good little collection, so get hold of it if you can. It's lots of stories are set on canals and boats, trains, and I can honestly say it's one of the best ghost story collections I've ever read. Rolt, of course, is very friendly with Robert Aikman, who's enjoying a vogue at the moment, a renaissance, and Aikman has a new collection, or probably a reissue, coming out, I think it's next month, I think it's February or March this year, from And Other Stories, a really good small press who do people like Anne Quinn, those sort of writers who are neglected. And that is reissued next month, looking forward to that. And Rolt and Aikman were both involved, not just with horror stories, but with the preservation of canals and waterways in the UK. They started this organisation to help that happen, which is a fantastic thing. And you know, it's work like that spirals out, and it probably influenced, you know, the redevelopment of harbour sites into sort of leisure spaces. And you know, as industry dies and sadly globalisation takes over, we find ourselves, you know, with these areas which are wonderful for walking and not so much going on. So it's good if they can sort of be developed and made more beautiful again for us to use. But it's a shame if they lose too much of their heritage. The beauty of Bristol Harbourside is there's still something here, as you'll see. Just over this swing bridge here, and to the left around the corner, is the Arnold Feeney bookshop. You might be able to see Arnold Feeney on the side of the building directly in the middle of the frame. Arnold Feeney's a gallery, it's a nice bookshop in there. It's in a video I did a while ago about bookshopping in Bristol. I'll try and stick a link in the description to this video on the channel page. And there's some geese down there as well, and there you go. Big fat goose and a gull. I'll be talking about gulls a lot as well recently, as well as cormorants, because gulls have a place in recent British New Gothic, which is quite interesting.
As I say, those pesky gulls. I mean, I like gulls myself. I think they're fantastic. I think they're marvels of evolution. There's a great book published by Little Toller by a guy called, I think it's Tim Dee, called Landfill. And it's all about waste, and it's also a lot about gulls, and it's a really fantastic bit of nature writing. It's I think it's done very well, because I think most people think, oh, gulls, you know, they're just vermin. But of course, the trouble with this sort of view is that it's very narrow and reductionist. If you're interested in nature, you know, you should be sentimental about it. They really are marvels of evolution. Funny enough, I was walking in Bristol a couple of years ago, and a gull swooped down behind me and pulled a sausage roll out of my hand, which, you know, it was funny, because obviously that was good for my health, but I was very impressed with it. So here's some of that heritage as I ramble on about gulls. As you see, I keep mentioning these people, but there just seems to be so many connections I'm finding these days between the new Gothic, horror fiction, folk horror, psychogeography, walking, all that stuff. And of course, whenever you go for a walk these days, if you film it or write about it, you instantly think psychogeography. And, you know, it's a very woolly term, as Merlin Coverley's eponymous book on the subject points out. And that's a great book, actually, and he seems very skeptical throughout it about what psychogeography actually is, and I feel rather the same. You know, if you look at the word psychogeography, psyche means the soul, and geography, obviously we know what that means. So it's the soul of a place, so how the place interacts with human consciousness. Talking about psychogeography and, you know, the meaning of place and the association. I mean, to me, it's all very individual, and you know, my associations with Bristol are all pretty good, really. And I guess what I practice when I do these things is not psychogeography, but autobiogeography. I coined that word a couple of weeks ago, and it's impossible to say. See, it just doesn't work. Autobiogeography. And, you know, very often these videos are about history, and history's all around us. This is interesting. What you've got here is the Matthew, which is one of the ships that the Pilgrim Fathers took to the New World. And of course, it's not the original Matthew, it's a replica. And it's been here some years now. It's really impressive, and the thing that always strikes you when you look at it is how small it is. You know, and the people crammed on board, crossing the Atlantic Ocean, you know, in quite primitive conditions, and you can go on little rides on it things now and again. And there we are at the Crow's Nest. And of course, this reminds me again that sometime soon, once I get a fresh copy, I've got to do that video about Toiler on the Sea by the Stranglers. So a bit of Victor Hugo coming up. I read lots of seafaring novels when I was younger, sort of in my late teens, early 20s. Things like London, Melville. One of my theories about Melville is that you shouldn't read Moby Dick first, you should read Typee, his first novel, which is about sailors running away from a ship in the South Seas and living with Polynesians. And then read things like Redburn and White Jacket, which mention places like Bristol and Liverpool. I'm just going to show you a view across the river. This is the Lloyd's building, which was vacated by Lloyd's a few years ago now. Lots of people used to work there. And it's a great space, you know, they've had gigs there outside, grill stock's been there, and you know, you go over there and it's a bit like being in 1930s fascist Italy. You know, it's got that sort of sense of grandeur and imposition. I'm just going to show you a bit more of the harbour, and in front of you now you can see that bridge structure with the horn type things on it, and it's down there that the statue of Edward Colston was recently unceremoniously dumped into the water. So that's where all that took place, and the Arnolfini there on your right, as I say. As you see, there's a little railway down here. It's covered with frost and rime this morning. Occasionally they have a little choo-choo going back and forth for the kiddies. A lot of those sort of great maritime fictions and memoirs, probably out of print. I think like Richard Henry Danner. You know, and I read things like Marcus Clarke's His Natural Life, which is a real rip-roaring Australian novel about love and revenge and ending up a convict, you know, and being accused of something you didn't do. So great stuff, you know. So I think reading those sort of seafaring novels is an important thing. One of my sort of guilty pleasures in watching TV, and I don't watch TV very much, is a series called Below Deck, which I first saw on, I think, Amazon, and it's about young people working on mega yachts, and I found it absolutely addictive. It has a spin-off called Below Deck Mediterranean, which was actually, I watched the spin-off first because I ended up discovering it because there was a series which was set on the Amalfi Coast, which I love, and it's full of these very big boats, sort of very bigger than this. This is slightly different. This is more like a pleasure cruise. You note the helicopter on the top, sort of shades of Wolf of Wall Street, and a great title there, Misconduct. The mythic resonance of rolling stock. Just love it. Lots of sort of eateries and pubs and those sort of things have popped up across the harbour side over the years down here. There's one across the water there, and that's the sort of place I might have a pint in an hour or so. What you also get is these rather nice sort of modernist flats and apartments popping up as well. Again, really great to live down here. It probably costs the earth. It's all very Ballardian, of course, but you know, I wouldn't mind one of those myself, I have to say. This is the first real day off I've had out and alone since Christmas, really, and I tend not to go out very much in that season because I'm busy at work. And as you will have seen if you follow the channel for a while, there was an awful lot of videos shot and uploaded at that point as well. So it's really nice to get out in the sunshine, the fresh air, and away from the crowds, and it's a beautiful day, as you can see. See in the distance there, those nice colourful houses. You're looking up towards Clifton and Redland. More Ballardian Supercans type apartments. Yeah, as I say, it's very, the architecture in Bristol, like the city itself, is very diverse, which is really enjoyable. So I'm coming up now to where Brunel's SS Great Britain is moored, and it's a big tourist attraction locally. I've never actually been on board myself. I will at some point. My mum came down from Wales with my uncle and aunt and had a look a couple of years ago, and they really enjoyed it. But you notice that when you live somewhere, you don't essentially do all the tourist stuff. You do your own stuff. And speaking about Brunel, I guess he was one of those figures who, you know, would pop up a lot in, you know, the latest steampunk novels, the inauthentic ones. And something you might not know is that steampunk, the word, was coined in Bath by the writer K.W. Jeter, wrote an amazing science fiction novel called Dr. Ada, and K.W. was one of 3 writers who worked together on the original steampunk books. The others were Tim Powers, author of The Anubis Gates, World Fantasy Award winner, and James Blaylock, who won Philip K. Dick Award. I think they all probably won the World Fantasy Award at one point. I'm not so sure about Jeter, who's predominantly a horror and SF writer. And KW was staying and living temporarily with my friend Les Escott in Oldfield Park in Bath. And Les had a publishing firm a bit later than that called Morrigan. And it was when the whole cyberpunk thing was going on in the early to mid 80s. And Les told me that apparently KW joked that, you know, he was going to write to Locust, the science fiction newspaper, and say, you know, my 1979 novel Morlock Night, which is a sequel to The Time Machine. The Morlocks get hold of the time machine and come back to Victorian England. It's not one of his best novels, but it is fun. He said, I'm going to call that steampunk, and say, you know, it's about time we looked more at steampunk. So that's where the word steampunk comes from. It's from Bath. And of course Brunel, as I say, you know, was one of those classic Victorian historical figures who pops up in steampunk novels. Yeah, and as I say, this is where the SS Great Britain is moored in the Great Western Dock. These are all new, these things. I'm sure they weren't there before. Negotiate my way through them. And look at that, we're a long way from Melbourne. And we're a long way from Bombay. And we seem to be quite away from the Falkland Islands as well, not to mention, you know, New York, but the SS Great Britain is nearby. That's good. So I'll show you some of the view here. And I say this is open 10 to 4. And what's the time now? It's 10:56. So not open today, Thursday to Sundays this time of year, but there's the ship itself. I'll try and show you that from across the river later. I'll take a little detour one has to take now, because you can't walk directly past the SS Great Britain to go down this side road and around into the next stage of the harbour side. Okay, we're outside Aardman, the animation studio, and so I'd never noticed they were here before. And they've got glass bricks. I do love glass bricks. They seem to me to be the very essence of modernism. There's a very loud crane in the background, so I apologise if you can't understand a word of this. But I just thought you might like to see that. Funnily enough, this Rolt's boatyard, probably nothing to do with LTC Rolt, but an interesting coincidence there. Here we have a tree protection zone, which is protecting one tree. Quite sure if that's doing the job. I guess it's doing that one. There's a little nest box there. Lovely, I guess it's protected. And there's the Albion dock, fantastic structure. Would love to see a large ship in there. Even though I've walked on here loads of times, I didn't notice this clock till the other day, which is really quite striking. Pun not intended, I should say. And I always like this view as you walk into this part of Bristol Marina, of the lovely colourful houses. One of these appeared on one of those sort of modern architecture design programs about 10 years ago, and my partner always points it out to me. It's interesting today is, even though they're not on the frame now, I'm seeing loads of 60-something rather slim fit men, unlike me, wearing shorts over compression tights, which is a very M. John Harrison kind of thing. In his latest novel, The Sunken Land Begins to Rise Again, I think I mentioned this before when I covered it briefly in another video, it seems to be obsessed with compression tights. It's also a novel about water. It's a very strange book. It's a very interesting book. It won the Goldsmiths Prize for fiction last year, £10,000, I think. Good for Mike. And when I knew him, he was a climber and fell runner. This was back in the 80s, and I still have occasional contact with him. Did an event with him a few years ago, and he's a very fit, wiry guy, and he has some great short stories about climbing like the Ice Monkey, and he was into that and had been for a long time. And I guess the compression tights are a way of, you know, maintaining your leg health, you know, when you're an outdoorsy type, you know. So, but yeah, that's a great novel, and this sort of set a lot of it on a barge, you know, and it has lots of things about the water babies in it, and it's sort of kind of uncategorizable. I'd say broadly, I'd say it's a fantasy novel, but you know, give it a try for yourself. It's quite interesting. And there's that beautiful vista of the houses looking down onto the marina. I always find that really, really lovely. It's absolutely fantastic. Down here, there's some people feeding gulls. Lots of gulls around. I imagine they're sort of gulls which have just sort of starred in a Nicholas Royal or Stephen Gregory novel. Clifton up there in the background. Now approaching the Harbour Master's office, and as I say, we walk through a boatyard. Working my way through the boatyard now. I'm just going to cut through and nip out the back. Bristol's hydraulic system. This is what they call a patent slip, where ships are drawn up out of the water for repairs. Never actually been down that towway, path further down the river. I must do that on another day when I have more time. Just before I cross that bridge, you can see there, I'm just going to show you here these lovely little cottages which sort of harbourmen lived in, probably. I apologise for the lack of solid history in this video, but it's more about just rambling really. And I'm going to show you here some houses here. This pub here, the Nova Scotia Hotel. I'm standing in its Crossroad Beer Garden. I would say I went in here once and it was dirty. The toilet's dreadful. Don't ever go in there. They really didn't deserve custom. Maybe it was an off day, but I thought it was really awful. This little house here, I'm on the roof. It was up for sale a while ago. There's this little statue of a cat, which I hope you can see. I'm just going to zoom in a moment. There he is, and he's perched above the guttering on Harbour Cottage. What a charming little chap. So we're on the other side of the harbour now. Give you a view.
Did he ever sit down with a book? Right?
The Ballardian Flats ahead. These charming little houses here. It's coming up to 11:30. I'm getting quite hungry now. I did think of getting a chocolate bar from the WH Smiths at the station, but the paucity of range rather put me off. You can never get a white Twix when you want one. Just sort of filming like this, you become aware of your own physiognomy more. Probably a good thing, considering the amount of weight I've put on since the pandemic started. I feel a bit like Bishop Beasley from the Jerry Cornelius books, you know, the anti-Cornelius conservative reactionary money grabbing cleric who's always stuffing himself with Mars bars. I used to look more like Jerry Cornelius. I look more like Beasley now. Referred to, of course, in the Hawkwind song Kings of Speed from the wonderful album Warrior on the Edge of Time. And I'll be filming a video about Warrior on the Edge of Time towards the end of January, early February. Some of it will be outside. I'm going to film probably at Stanton Drew, where there's a stone circle, because you know, it'll be a great opportunity to get out and to show you another little glory of the West Country. But yeah, I'm getting really hungry now, so I might sort of go to one of these she eateries along here. And of course, you know, got to get the timing right. Will they be open? Will they have something nice and edible that's not too expensive? Have a pint with it, we'll see. And across the way from me now you can see the SS Great Britain with its masts. This is Porto Quay. Some very nice desirable residences down here. Wouldn't mind one of these myself. If I couldn't get a little muse, I'd go for one of these mega flats. It would be very sort of Bristol psycho, you know, it's the old Bret Easton Ellis thing. And again, we obviously invoke Ballard, as we always do when we see any architecture like this. Can't help ourselves. And here we see an interesting memorial to Samuel Plimsoll MP. Was he the inventor of the DAP, we ask ourselves? Was he involved with the genealogy of the training shoe? I suspect not, but you know, maybe we'll never know unless we look to Wikipedia. This area always seems very science fictional to me. There's a little cafe there, Broken Dock on the left. I've been in there and got a pint in there. They're shut, of course, which is why nobody's there. But I really like this area. It always makes me think of the William Morris Socialist Workers' Paradise, as Alexei Sayle would have said. It's got this bridge and these apartments, and it's got this sort of very utopian feel, and amazingly there's nobody on it, so I'm just going to ramble on and look at this walk. And I always think this would be a great setting for a science fiction film, you know, they just the right bit of plot sort of and the right sort of set dressing and you'd be laughing because it's really utopian. And as you see, it's a quiet space. I call the plant life at the edges and the margins really nice, and it's shady and quiet. Me kicking litter around, it's got these rather sort of Quatermass type designed seating. I say Quatermass, it's really more like the sort of thing you see in David Cronenberg's early films that he shot, you know, on university campuses in Canada, things like Stereo and Crimes of the Future. And Cronenberg is apparently in Greece, where he's shooting a new feature film called Crimes of the Future, but apparently it's not a remake of the original. I just, he just couldn't leave that title alone. Maybe it's a sequel, who can say? Unlikely, it seems. I'm really looking forward to that. It's really good to see that DC is getting back to making films. My favourite filmmaker of all time, and to me the man who made the best science fiction films ever made. Yeah. This is probably the quietest bit of Bristol I've been in today, and I'm absolutely loving it. Look at that, completely utopian. I head down this boulevard, and there's a square sort of just beyond here, and I think I'm going to nip into the Costa there and use the toilets and have a coffee and a cake outside, because I'm absolutely starving. I hope you've enjoyed this anyway. Little troll around one of my favourite parts of Bristol, and I think then I'm going to try and wander up to the last bookshop, and I might pick up, you know, the odd Gollancz Masterwork for £3. We'll see. Of course, as I say, all these things always remind you of Ballard as well as Cronenberg. The Prime Endoscopy Bristol, it's glittering glass. There's the Rainbow Casino, and that sort of leafy frontage reminds me of John Fox's album The Quiet Man, and the book of the same title. Things like Richard Jefferies' After London, Wild England, where, you know, the country is overgrown and dystopian and mankind's gone. And, you know, as if to sort of presage that, the Costa looks like it's shut down permanently. So much for my coffee. I'll have to look in another direction, and I think I can see Rod and Ruby's coffee up there, so I might have to give that a try. So my journey approaches its end. I just had a really nice coffee and a couple of cannoli back in Millennium Prospect, wherever it's called, from a small indie run by a couple of young hipsters. I have to say, the coffee was fantastic, the cannoli were nice, but God, it was expensive. But, you know, that's the cost of gentrification. The Ferris wheel, reminiscent of Ray Bradbury. I spoke about gulls earlier and about Tim Dee's landfill. This bin, glass, cans and plastic, card and paper, landfill waste. That's where it'll all end, in landfill waste, as there are more and more of us. In the postmodern space, the incongruous rules. The stag beetle outside an aquarium. The roof of the aquarium. The inescapability of the endlessly contemporary. As Mark Fisher says, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. We live in the future. We live in Rollerball. We live through A Clockwork Orange. Where will we live from now on? Postmodernism offers us the endlessly contemporary, the end of history, capitalist realism, the inescapability of the media. Music erupts into a private space, into a public space, the endless drift of the waterfall. the endless drift of the hyperreal.